The storage room reeked of rust and fear, not just the metallic scent seeping from old chains or the cold air bouncing off 4 concrete walls, but an oppressive silence, the kind that hovered and watched, telling anyone trapped inside that they were no longer alone. Somewhere in the far darkness, chains clinked softly against each other, like the shallow breath of something infernal. A single bulb swayed overhead, its sickly yellow light spilling across the stained concrete floor, where something dark was slowly spreading. Jamie Carter hung, suspended, wrists raw and bleeding from the ropes pulled too tight. Her breath came fast and sharp, scraping through clenched, trembling teeth, forming faint white clouds in the bitter winter cold of New York. "Just kill me quickly," she whispered, her voice like crushed sand dragging through a torn throat. The footsteps stopped. They resumed again, slow and steady, the stride of a man who had never needed to rush because the world always waited for him. "Look at me." The voice rolled out like velvet wrapped around the edge of a blade, soft yet lethal, the lilt of an Italian accent slicing through the room like the snap of a violin string. She did not look. She could not. Her eyes stayed fixed on the floor where the wet stain continued to bloom. It could have been water or blood. I said, "Look at me." This time, it was no gentle order. The words cut across the air like a whip. Jamie lifted her head, fighting every instinct screaming at her to disappear into silence. And he stood there. Marcus Rinaldi. They called him the Ghost of Brooklyn. Tall and commanding, as if carved from marble and shadow. Even in this place, steeped in violence and despair, he looked as though he had stepped off the page of a fashion magazine, wearing a charcoal gray suit without a single wrinkle. His dark hair slicked back as if he had just left a salon, his sun-warmed skin absorbing the bulb's pale light and turning it almost golden. But his eyes were what made her shiver. Dark brown, espresso deep, unreadably cold. She had seen pictures of him in newspapers, blurry shots from security cameras that never captured the full weight of his presence. Marcus Rinaldi, the man who controlled half of Brooklyn before reaching his mid-30s. The man whose name made judges quietly excuse themselves from related cases. The man politicians crossed themselves over whenever anyone dared speak of him. And now, he was looking at her, unblinking, silent, as if assessing a piece of art or deciding whether it was worth destroying. "What is your name?" he asked. And the way he asked told her this wasn't the first time he'd posed the question. "Does it matter?" Her voice came out stronger than she expected. "Good. She might die here, but she would not beg." A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, almost imperceptible, yet enough to change his entire face. "Everything matters, Jamie. Your name, why you're here, and why the idiots under me thought they could act without asking me first." The calm, almost gentle way he spoke twisted her stomach with a new kind of fear. She had thought he was the one who ordered her abduction, but if he wasn't, then things were far worse. "Jamie," she said, "nothing left to lose. Jamie Carter." He nodded as though he already knew. Then, impossibly, he pulled a small knife from inside his coat. The dull bulb glinted off the blade as he flicked it open with practiced ease. "Please," she whispered, her brief strength dissolving. "Just make it fast." But he did not bring the knife to her throat. Instead, he stepped behind her. She felt the cold metal touch her wrist, heard the rope fibers snap apart, and then her arms collapsed forward, stinging violently as blood surged back into her numb hands. Her legs buckled from the long suspension, and she fell against a solid chest carrying the faint scent of expensive cologne and something darker, more dangerous. "Easy," he murmured, one hand steadying her waist so she wouldn't fall. "You're safe now." A jagged laugh escaped her like broken glass. "Safe? In a warehouse with a notorious Mafia boss? Sounds like a joke." "At least you're honest about what you're thinking," he said with another small smile. "But yes, you're safe. At least, with me." If you're still listening and this story has touched something inside you, take a second to subscribe to our channel. Like and share this video so we can keep bringing you heartfelt stories every single day. And if you don't mind, tell me, where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and let us know which corner of the world this story has reached. We treasure every single message you share. Jamie wanted to pull away, to create distance from the man holding her up, but her legs were limp, betraying every command she gave them. He did not force her to stand, did not take advantage of her weakness, simply held her just enough to keep her from collapsing, but not enough to make her feel owned. That gentleness frightened her more than any violence could. In her mind, Marcus Rinaldi was a monster in a suit, a cold-blooded kingpin with a killer's gaze. But the man in front of her did not move like a murderer. He was dangerous, certainly, but she did not see contempt in his eyes, nor the possessive hunger she had grown used to from others. Only a focused attention, as though she were an equation he was determined to solve. "Why?" Jamie asked, her voice raw after hours hanging in the dark. "Why are you here? If you didn't order this, why save me?" Marcus exhaled softly, as if weighing his words like they mattered. "Because someone under me forgot something basic," he said, his gaze never leaving hers. "No one touches anyone in this city without my permission, especially those who carry the mark." Jamie blinked. "What? Mark?" Marcus did not answer immediately. He stepped back just enough for her to stand on her own if she chose, but kept a hand lightly at her elbow, a quiet anchor. "How long have you been here?" he asked. "I don't know," Jamie whispered, her tongue heavy and thick. "A day? 2? I lost consciousness when the van stopped." Marcus nodded slowly. "They hid you well. I didn't know until one of the hired men started bragging about handling an old piece of cargo." The words made Jamie tremble, not from cold. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to swallow the rising wave of nausea. Marcus noticed, paused, then pulled a thin cloth from his coat and handed it to her. Not a gentleman's handkerchief, but a soldier's cloth, sturdy and clean. She accepted it, said nothing, but wiped the blood from her wrists. "I thought you ran everything," she said, her voice still sharp. "I've heard your name so many times. The threats, the stories. No one even speaks of you without fear." Marcus smiled, but there was no pride in it. "Good. Fear keeps order in this world. But fearing the wrong man, that's a disaster." Jamie studied him, skepticism still in her eyes. "So, what am I to you now? A problem to fix? A warning to your men? You're a variable," he said instantly. "And I don't like unsolved variables." Jamie let out a brittle laugh. "I'm not a puzzle. I'm just someone who tried to run and failed." Marcus stilled for a heartbeat. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, low like wind slipping through a stone crevice. "No, you didn't fail. You're alive." A simple line, but the way he said it made it feel weighty, like a vow carved into stone. Jamie looked at him again, truly looked. He was still Marcus Rinaldi, the man Brooklyn feared. But in his eyes now, there was not only shadow, there was something that looked almost like anger, not at her, but at those who had done this to her, a dangerous, simmering fury too quiet to dismiss. Jamie realized, perhaps for the first time in years, that she was no longer alone in this nightmare. But she also knew that anything gained from a man like this came with a price. And that price, she still did not know. Jamie kept her eyes on Marcus's face, searching for something, some thin border between truth and deception, between protection and manipulation, but the only thing she found was a disquieting calm, as if he were used to being seen through but had never once been understood. She stepped back half a pace, just enough to create distance without escaping his presence. Marcus noticed the movement, said nothing, and simply drew the folding knife from his coat pocket. The blade snapped open with a sharp metallic click that cut through the silence, making Jamie's spine go rigid. She swallowed hard, her breath shallow and quickening. He didn't draw a gun, didn't raise his voice, didn't make a sudden move, yet something in the way he approached her, slow and fully in control, reminded her of the men who used to touch her with gentle smiles before reducing her to an object. She took another step back. Marcus stopped, his voice low and steady. "I won't hurt you. I gave you my word. I'm only cutting the rope." Jamie didn't respond. She only lifted her wrist, letting him see the angry red marks etched into her skin, the raw, bleeding grooves and the numbness beneath them. Marcus stepped forward, carefully lifting her wrist with one hand while guiding the knife beneath the rope with the other. The overhead light cast a pale glow, catching on the blade and in his eyes, and for the briefest moment Jamie saw something unexpected flicker in the espresso-brown depths, a faint, unfamiliar gentleness, not pity, but respect. The blade sliced through the rope in one smooth motion, clean, efficient, without adding to her pain. The severed bindings fell to the concrete with a dry echo that carried across the cold room. The sudden freedom made Jamie dizzy. Her hands throbbed, her shoulders burned, her chest tightened. She staggered forward, but Marcus caught her, his arm firm around her waist. She didn't fight him. She stood still for a moment, long enough for the spinning in her head to settle. She looked up, seeing his face this close for the first time. Marcus Rinaldi wasn't handsome in a flashy, glamorous way. His features held the quiet refinement of a man whose power did not need an introduction. A sharp jawline, a straight nose, eyes heavy with the certainty of someone who had already read every secret in this room. And in that unguarded moment, when their eyes met, Jamie knew he was not a man who could ever be forgotten. Marcus looked back at her with equal intensity, not assessing her worth, not pretending, but seeing her. Clearly, without flinching, she tightened her hand over her injured wrist, a reflex of self-protection. He released her gently, so lightly she couldn't pinpoint the exact moment contact ended. Jamie exhaled slowly and whispered, "Now what?" Marcus slid the knife back into his coat, his voice quiet and even. "Now I find out why you were marked as a target. And after that, we hunt." She blinked. "We?" Marcus didn't smile. His gaze deepened like the bottom of the Hudson River. "You are a survivor. And I am a man who never forgets the ones who made my sister disappear." Jamie froze, her chest rising and falling. A dozen alarms shrieked inside her, but for the first time in 3 years, a small spark broke through the ash, something not quite hope, but a faint sense that if anyone could make the man who once owned her tremble, he was standing in front of her now. Wind hissed through the gap beneath the metal door, sweeping across the dusty concrete floor streaked with dried blood, turning the room into something that felt like an unburied grave. Jamie shivered, not only from the cold but from the silence stretching between them after his last words. "I am a man who never forgets the ones who made my sister disappear," a sentence that was both a threat and a vow. She looked at him, then turned away. She wasn't ready to face the shadow of herself reflected in someone else's eyes, especially a man who could see through the layers she had spent 3 years building. But Marcus didn't let her hide. "Who are you, Jamie?" he asked, his voice soft but unmistakably grounded. She bit her lip, tasting the metallic tang of blood. That question wasn't simple. It wasn't small talk. It was the opening line of a verdict, or a salvation. "I told you already," she said, eyes on the cold concrete wall. "Jamie Carter." "Names are easy," Marcus replied. "But who are you, truly? Why did they think you were worth abducting and hauling back here like a lost piece of property?" Jamie closed her eyes. Old memories surged like a flood, screams in the dark, a dim light flickering across a concrete ceiling, a red-hot blade pressed to skin, the burning stench of flesh. She had forgotten how to breathe, how to speak, how to believe she was still human. She had survived by becoming a shadow unnamed, unseen, unheard, and then she escaped. New name, new hair, new state. Each night, a silent prayer that they would never find her. But now she understood it had all been futile. Marcus stood still, hands in his coat pockets, watching her with unwavering patience. No anger, no demands, just waiting. And strangely, that patience tightened something deep in her chest. "Who I used to be doesn't matter," she murmured. "What matters is that now I'm just someone running, a survivor, a walking corpse with scars that don't heal." "Surviving isn't a crime," Marcus said, "but running forever is a prison you build for yourself." Jamie turned to him, meeting his gaze. "What about you? You don't run? There's nothing that scares you enough to make you turn and flee?" Marcus didn't answer right away. Then, like smoke drifting from a crack in stone, he said, "I used to run, but I learned that the more I ran, the closer they got. The more I hid, the stronger they became." "And you chose to fight," she whispered. "I chose to make them fear me more than I feared them." Jamie let out a hollow laugh, joyless and thin. "I once thought I could do that too. But when they started, I wasn't me anymore." Marcus tilted his head, his eyes heavy and quiet. "What did they do to you?" Jamie said nothing. And then, as though every defense she had ever built cracked at once, she lifted her shirt slightly, revealing her lower back where a scorched, raised mark twisted across her skin. A grotesque tattoo, a serpent coiling with hollow eyes and an open mouth, as though swallowing her soul. Marcus stepped close, not touching her, only looking. His eyes changed. No longer the eyes of a dangerous man, but of a predator awakened by a buried rage. "Serpent brand," he murmured, barely audible. Jamie lowered her shirt, hiding the part of herself no one had seen since she escaped. "Now you know," she whispered, her voice raw. "I was property. Once marked, forever theirs." Marcus stared at her, his eyes darkening to something fierce. "No, Jamie. They may have burned their mark into your skin, but they never owned your soul. If they had, you wouldn't be standing here." Jamie held his gaze for a long moment. And in that fragile, wordless space between two strangers, something real passed between them. An unspoken recognition, a shared darkness, a truth no longer hidden. Marcus remained still, his gaze locked on the place where Jamie's scar had disappeared beneath the torn fabric of her shirt. And though neither of them spoke for several long, stretching seconds, the air between them thickened with everything they had not yet said. Jamie felt her whole body tighten, as if even Marcus's breath might be enough to make her collapse all over again. He stepped forward half a pace, slow and without a hint of threat, yet she still recoiled instinctively until her spine pressed against the cold wall. Her eyes were sharp with fear, like a small animal that had just slipped from the jaws of a predator and was ready to claw one last time. Marcus did not move closer. He stopped where he was, holding just enough distance to keep from invading her space, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight deeper than the darkness filling the room. "I have seen that mark before," he said. Jamie's fingers curled around the edge of her shirt, clutching it as if she could tear herself open. "Then you know what it means." "I do," Marcus answered, his gaze never leaving her face. "Serpent brand, the emblem of one of the human trafficking branches under the K group, one of the cruelest divisions they have." Jamie shuddered, her whole body reacting to memories etched too deeply to fade. "They don't call it a tattoo, they call it a marking ritual, the same way people brand cattle with heated iron." Marcus's eyes narrowed, his voice dropping to something barely above a breath. "They did that to you?" Jamie did not answer at once. She bit her lip until she tasted blood, then gave a tiny nod. "I was one of their high-value items 3 years ago. When I tried to escape the first time, they strapped me to a metal chair and heated the iron for 2 minutes before pressing it into my back. One held my arms, one held my legs. The third one laughed." Marcus's hand curled into a fist, the knuckles turning white. "The third one's name?" "Victor Resnick," she said slowly, as if carving each syllable out of her throat. "He was the shipment manager in East New York back then. I don't know what rank he's climbed to now, but he's alive, and he's still running that nest of monsters." Marcus closed his eyes for a moment. Jamie could not see the rage rising inside him, but she felt it, a heat like the breath of a caged beast swallowing its own roar. "My sister," he said, using that word for the first time, no longer calling her family or someone. "She also disappeared 3 years ago. When they found her body, there was nothing left to identify, except part of a burned scar on her shoulder, a fragment of a serpent." Jamie froze. She looked at him, and for the first time saw a crack in the fortress Marcus had built around himself. She said nothing. She didn't need to. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was shared grief, thick and wordless, built from blood and ash. Marcus opened his eyes again, his gaze sharp as a blade. "That scar," he said, "is not shame, it is proof that you survived, that they did not kill you." Jamie shook her head, her eyes burning. "It is a sentence. It reminds me every morning that I was once turned into something less than human." Marcus stepped forward another half pace, and this time she did not retreat. "It does not remind you what you were, Jamie. It reminds you that you broke the chains, that you are no longer their property." She looked up at him, and in his eyes she saw no pity, no soft consolation, only a controlled fury and a kind of respect she had not expected any human to offer her. For the first time in years, her chest ached with something she had forgotten, a sense that someone saw her not as a victim, but as a fighter. "I have been running from that scar for 3 years, she whispered. "Every city I passed through, I wondered whether someone would notice it. Whether anyone had seen it before, in the dark rooms where doors didn't open." Marcus tilted his head, his voice a distant rumble like thunder far off. "I see it now. and I cannot ignore it, just as you will never forget." Jamie swallowed hard, the air around them thickening. "If you want revenge," she said, "I won't stop you, but don't drag me into it. I don't have anything left." Marcus looked at her steadily. "I am not dragging you in, Jamie. I am asking you to stand with me." The sentence shook something loose inside her. After years of fleeing, someone dared to look at that scar, not to condemn her, not to pity her, but to declare that it could be the beginning of something else, not an ending, not a verdict, but a call to survival. Jamie went still, her lips pressed together to keep from reacting. She was not someone who sought justice, and she was certainly not someone who chased impossible battles. Yet Marcus's eyes were not like the voices that once lured her into hell. They did not demand. They did not claim. They were simply an open door. And what unsettled her most was that she didn't immediately turn away. Marcus took an unlit cigarette from his coat, rolling it between his fingers as though he needed something to keep his rage from splitting him open. His voice low and steady, not trembling, but with something cracked woven through the spaces between his words. "My sister's name was Elena," he said, 6 years younger than me, old enough to paint her nails and slip love notes into shoeboxes and believe the world would be gentle if she was gentle first. She always thought I was a hero. Jamie didn't interrupt. She stood as still as if any movement might shatter his story and send it scattering into dust. Elena disappeared one August afternoon. She was walking home from summer class. The distance was only 3 blocks, full of sunlight and bus engines, but no one saw her after the corner turn. Marcus paused, gripping the cigarette, his eyes darkening as if staring straight through time. 3 days later, a warehouse on the outskirts of Newark was found. The smell inside forced the firefighters to wear full masks. There were 4 bodies, 3 unidentifiable. The 4th was confirmed by a broken half of a gold necklace, identical to the piece I kept. Jamie felt her stomach clench. The details didn't need description. The images bloomed in her mind as if sketched in blood. On her shoulder they found part of the serpent brand. I don't know how they took her, or why. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't mixed up in anything dangerous. Maybe it was just easy, convenient. Maybe it was because she was my sister. Jamie inhaled sharply, the pain in his voice slicing into her like shards of glass. Marcus didn't need to shout or weep. His silence weighed heavier than any outburst. "I killed 3 men afterward," he said. "Not the ones who did it, only the ones closest to her that I could find. But none of them were connected to Victor. He was smarter than all of them. He vanished the moment things heated up." Jamie clenched her fists. Victor. His name had been the shadow at her back for 3 years, and now she learned he was also the demon haunting the man in front of her. Something thin and fragile felt like it was tying their ruined lives together. Marcus lit the cigarette but didn't smoke it, letting the flame burn for a moment before pressing it out with his fingers. No flinching. No reaction. The pain had become a habit. "I swore that if I ever had the chance, I would erase that rotten network from the map," he murmured. "Every last one of them. I am not the police. I don't need evidence. I only need names." Jamie said nothing, but her heartbeat quickened, because for the first time, the broken pieces inside her began to shift in the same direction as someone else. Not toward revenge, toward an ending. Jamie did not know who spoke first. It might have been her. It might have been him. Or perhaps the silence that had stretched too long had transformed into a language that required no words at all. But when their eyes met again, what quietly rippled through the air was no longer suspicion or hurt. It was something unfamiliar yet unmistakably real. Alliance. She exhaled softly. "You said if you ever had the chance, you would wipe them out." Marcus nodded. "And now I'm standing in front of a chance." Jamie stayed silent. She knew whatever he said next would change everything, that if she nodded, there would be no turning back. But she also knew that if she walked away now, the scar on her back would never again be just a scar. It would become the mark of surrender. "I have a network, people, resources, intelligence," Marcus said slowly, his voice low as night water. "I can track down every link in the K-group chain, but I don't know how they think. You do." Jamie did not deny it. 3 years on the run, fleeing even her own shadow, had taught her the structure of that network down to its bone. The code words they used, their transport routes, their silent language. She didn't need a map. They had carved themselves into her memory, corner by corner. "I'm not someone you can trust," she murmured. "I lied to a lot of people to stay alive." Marcus didn't blink. "Then now is the time to use that survival to make them pay. I don't want to kill anyone." "Good," he said, without a trace of mockery. "You don't need to kill. You only need to point. Tell me which door to break, which man to take, which artery in their operation is the one that bleeds." Jamie leaned against the wall, exhausted yet thinking faster than she had in 3 years. "What if I told you I could lead you to one of their incoming shipment points?" Marcus looked at her the way a man looks when he already knows the answer, from the moment he sees the scar on a woman's back. "Then I gather my people," he said. "No questions, no trials." Jamie lifted her gaze, her eyes no longer uncertain but sharpened by something colder. "And what if I tell you I once worked for the government, that I was embedded in that network as an undercover operative?" Marcus did not frown, did not look surprised. He simply studied her, as though the final pieces of a puzzle were falling into place on their own. "You're not an operative anymore," he said. "No. Not since they pulled out of the mission and left me behind. I'm nothing now." "Then now you are simply yourself." The words sounded simple, but they carried the weight of a verdict. Jamie gave a brittle laugh. "And what is myself? Someone betrayed, stripped, branded like cattle?" Marcus shook his head, his voice cold as wind threading through a graveyard. "You are a living witness, the only person who ever walked out of their hands with her memory intact. And if you agree to work with me, we won't just cut down a branch. We will rip out the entire root." Jamie looked at him longer than usual, not searching for lies, but searching for something she thought she had lost long ago. Meaning. "I have conditions," she said. Marcus nodded once. "Say them. I want to know every plan, no secrets, no manipulation." Agreed. "And when this is over, I decide where I go, what I become, with no debt and no leash. You will be free." Jamie tightened her hand. "And if I fall back into their hands, I want you to promise you won't. Let me live." Marcus did not answer immediately. He stepped forward, close enough that she could hear his heartbeat, steady and forceful like a war drum. "I promise," he said, voice deep and certain. "But I also promise this. I will not let that happen." Jamie nodded without another word. In that moment, in a freezing warehouse with 2 people who believed they had nothing left to lose, a pact was forged. No paper, no lawyers, no witnesses, only 2 scars, and a promise. The warehouse was so silent Jamie could hear the whisper of her own clothing as she turned. The agreement was set, but both of them understood there was no room for mistakes now. She looked at Marcus under the dim overhead bulb, which cast his face half in light, half in shadow, as if mirroring the nature that lived inside him. She once thought she knew what survival meant, but standing here now, she understood something new. Survival wasn't merely breathing, it was knowing what price she was willing to pay to finally be free. Marcus pulled a small device from his coat and set it on a rotting wooden crate, a voice recorder. No connection, no transmitter. A simple piece of equipment placed on the makeshift table like a reminder. From this moment on, their words and decisions would matter. He looked at her. Jamie nodded without hesitation. Marcus pressed the button. The red light blinked. "State your terms clearly," he said. She inhaled, keeping her voice steady. "I am not your subordinate. I do not take orders. I am a partner. You need me because I have information. I need you because you have reach." Marcus nodded. "Continue. I can walk away at any time, without being hunted or threatened. If I decide things are spiraling beyond control, I disappear, and you let me go." He paused for a few seconds. "You trust I will keep that promise?" "No. But I need you to understand I will never bow again. Not to anyone." Marcus nodded slightly, accepting. "What else?" Jamie gripped the edge of the crate. "I want a name. A new identity. If we succeed, I leave this country. I start a life somewhere no one knows who I was." Marcus studied her, his eyes seeming to read through her without judgment. "Freedom always has a price. I already paid in advance with 3 years of hell," Jamie said quietly. "The rest, I pay with their blood." He didn't smile and didn't nod. He simply pressed the stop button on the recorder and put it away. "Fine, you'll have what you asked for. But I have one condition of my own." Jamie folded her arms, wary. "Say it." Marcus stepped closer, stopping a single arm's length away. While you work with me, you do not lie. You do not hide information. No double games. She gave a dry laugh. I was an undercover operative, Marcus. My whole job was lying. But you are Jamie now, he said. Not any of the identities you wore before. If you want me to see you as someone I can trust, that is the only rule. She didn't answer right away, but eventually she nodded, sharply, as though stitching that vow into her own skin. Fine. From now on, truth. Even if it kills me. Marcus extended his hand. Not the cold clasp of a Mafia deal, not the blood-slick grip of men who traded in pain, just a hand offered between two people who had lost everything and were now wagering what little remained on a nameless war. Jamie stared at that hand for one brief moment. Then she placed hers into it. The grip was firm, warm, steady. It was not the beginning of a plan. It was a commitment. And the first marker of freedom, whatever the cost might be. As their hands parted, Marcus turned toward the rusted warehouse door, pushing it open with his shoulder to let the faint light of the first dawn after a long night spill in. Jamie followed him, each step pushing her further from her old nightmare and closer to a battle she never imagined she would choose to return to. But this time, she was not prey. In the back lot, a black SUV waited. Inside, an Asian man sat behind the wheel, dressed plainly but carrying an alert sharpness in his eyes. Marcus nodded toward him, then looked back at Jamie. This is Lee. Trust him. He doesn't speak much, but he hears more than anyone I know. Lee glanced at Jamie in the rearview mirror and gave a single nod. No greeting. None needed. The car pulled away from the abandoned industrial block. They drove in silence for nearly half an hour before Jamie spoke. I know a place, she said. Not where they are, but where their couriers used to stop. An old car wash in the southern Bronx. It used to be a drop point for Victor's group. If it's still active, there will be signs. Marcus didn't ask how she knew. He simply turned to Lee. Take us there. 5 minutes later, they stopped a block away, hiding behind an abandoned delivery truck. Jamie crouched low, eyes trained on the lot in front of the decrepit car wash. Everything looked quiet, too quiet, she signaled Marcus. A crooked old camera hung from the corner of the building, dead for years. The metal gate was halfway down, just enough to obscure a small cargo van inside. No people, no sound. But when they crossed the overgrown grass and slipped through the side door, Jamie knew the feeling in her chest had been right. Someone had been here recently. The smell of cigarette smoke was still fresh. A tire track etched into the dusty concrete, and on a broken control table sat a device Jamie never thought she would see again. A mobile signal receiver used to tap into low-frequency internal radio chatter. Lee turned it on. Static screeched for a few seconds before a voice bled through, warped by interference but unmistakably real. You sure that girl ain't dead? I hate when the product runs before we pull the chip. A man's voice, Eastern European, followed by another man's dry, cruel laugh. If she was dead, I'd have dumped her body by the dead docks. But Victor wants her kept. He says that one used to be special. You know what kind of special he means. Jamie froze, her hands curling into fists. Her throat tightened. It was them. It was their voices, the men who had locked her up, who laughed while she screamed. Marcus shot her a look, then gestured for Lee to record. The laughter crackled again through the receiver. I bet she thinks someone's coming for her. Poor thing. If she's smart, she'll kill herself first. Click. Silence. Jamie shut her eyes. Her whole body trembled not with fear, but with the rising pulse of fury. 3 years of terror. 3 years believing she would never be strong enough to listen to those voices again. But now, hearing them, the only thing she wanted was to make them scream. Marcus lifted the receiver, staring at the blinking signal light. This frequency isn't something civilians can access. They're still operating like a closed organization. Lee pulled out a recording drive, plugged it in, and began saving the file. Marcus turned to Jamie. Recognize any voice? Jamie nodded. The one who laughed first is Anton Resnick. He used to handle transport in eastern Queens. The other one? I'm not sure. Maybe Luka or Petrov. I need to hear more. Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder, not gripping, just present. You will hear more, I promise. But for now we go back, prepare the next step. Jamie didn't answer. But in her eyes, for the first time in years, There was something besides fear. A flame. And that flame had just been fed by the voice of a man who once believed she would never dare return. Back at Marcus's temporary base in Long Island City, Jamie stood before a wall-sized map covered in markings, strings, and grainy black and white printouts. Lee was scanning the low-frequency signal they had pulled from the car wash, while Marcus watched in silence from behind her, his sharp gaze sketching out an entire movement pattern inside his mind. Jamie pointed to a red dot on the map, marked as Warehouse 17, near the old rail line in eastern Queens. Her voice was steady. This is where Anton used to stop when he handled the east sector. If they're still following the old structure, this is likely a transfer or storage site. Marcus nodded and signaled for Lee to prep the team. No police, no federal agents. This was a raid done Marcus's way. Quiet, precise, and leaving no one breathing if they chose to fight back. That night, clouds smothered the sky. A thin rain fell, turning the pavement into a blurred mirror of streetlights, as if ghosts were waiting beneath the surface. 4 black SUVs running without headlights rolled to a halt in the decaying industrial zone, where rusted containers and crumbling buildings stood like relics from a forgotten era of freight and steel. Dressed in black, Jamie blended into the formation like a piece of moving shadow. Her heartbeat was slow and deep, not from fear but from something close to reclaiming a piece of herself. Lee signaled with his hand. Marcus took point. The team split into 3 groups, circling the warehouse. Jamie and Marcus moved along the side route, where an old metal door hung chained with a rusted lock. A soft click, and the lock fell away. No alarm, no reaction, only the cold, oil-stained air slipping out from the darkness within. Inside, the warehouse was black as ink, save for a few thin shafts of light dripping through the high ceiling. A delivery truck sat in the middle, and beside it were 3 men loading crates. One of them was Anton Resnick. Jamie recognized him instantly, the same fitted clothes, the same neat haircut, the same crooked grin that looked like he was sneering at the world itself. Marcus raised his hand and pressed his thumb down twice. The signal. 3 seconds later, the main doors crashed open. Lee's team stormed in from both sides. Shouts erupted. Flashlights exploded into light. One of the men reached for a gun but dropped dead before his fingers touched the trigger. Anton spun to run toward the back exit and froze. Jamie was standing in the narrow passage, a Glock leveled at his chest. His eyes flickered surprise, then recognition. His mouth opened, but before he could form a single word, Marcus's voice sliced the air from behind her, cold as steel. "Don't waste breath. He's yours." Jamie stepped forward, each step anchored and controlled. Anton gave a strained laugh. "Didn't think you were still alive." Her voice cut through him like a blade slicing paper. "You should have known the day you let me escape." He glanced around, realizing he was surrounded. He dropped his gun slowly and raised his hands. "I know what you want. I can give you names, addresses, hell, even where Victor is hiding. Don't kill me." Marcus didn't move. Jamie didn't blink. "You're not leverage," she said. "You're living evidence. I'll keep you breathing just enough to talk." Anton was bound, dragged out like a sack of meat. A few others were taken alive. The rest lay motionless on the concrete floor. The entire raid lasted fewer than 8 minutes. But for Jamie, those 8 minutes were an entire lifetime turning over to a new page. When they stepped out of the warehouse, heavy rain began to fall. Jamie lifted her face, letting the icy drops run down her skin. For the first time, she didn't feel soaked in fear. She felt something closer to hope. Anton was handcuffed with plastic restraints, a wet rag shoved into his mouth, bruises blooming across his back from the struggle. He was shoved into a small room behind Marcus's temporary base, once a storage area for mechanical equipment, now an unofficial interrogation cell. No excess light, no windows, just a cold metal table, 2 chairs, and a hidden camera in the corner. Jamie entered without a sound, like a specter. Marcus stood behind her, hands off. He knew this confrontation wasn't his. This was the moment Jamie had to face the darkest part of her memory. She looked at Anton, the man who had once been her nightmare made flesh. He panted through clenched teeth, his eyes flickering between fear and arrogance. She pulled the rag from his mouth, not fast, not slow. Anton spat water onto the floor and gave a crooked smile. "I know you won't kill me. You need me." She didn't react, just pulled a chair and sat down, eye to eye. Maybe, she said, but that doesn't mean I forgive or forget. Anton tilted his head, his nasal voice carrying that familiar mocking lilt. Didn't think you were alive. After that night, you disappeared like smoke. We thought you were dead under the docks. Jamie didn't blink. That was your plan, wasn't it? Brand me, torture me, and when I had nothing left to sell, dump my body like trash. Do you know how many never made it out? Anton shrugged. Business. Don't be emotional. Jamie rose suddenly, leaning in close, her shadow swallowing him. You think this is just emotion? Her voice dropped to a lethal whisper. You think I'm just some broken girl who got lucky and ran away? Anton stared at her, unsettled by the absolute lack of fear in her eyes. You were merchandise. High value maybe, but still just merchandise. I spent 3 years watching you, Jamie said, her voice cold as ice. I memorized the routes, the shift changes, the way Victor discards people when they become liabilities. I know you, Anton, and I know that right now, to Victor, you are already dead because you let me find you. Anton's eyes widened slightly. He swallowed hard. I'm not here to negotiate, Jamie continued. I'm here to finish what you started, not for myself, for the others, for people like Elena Rinaldi. The name fell into the room like a stone dropped into a still lake. Marcus stiffened behind her. Anton frowned, searching his memory. That girl? Yeah, I remember the name. Screamed a lot. Weak one. Didn't last 2 days. The words had barely left his mouth when Jamie struck him. Her hand cracked across his face, not fueled by blind rage, but by something sharper. Justice. Anton toppled backward, chair clattering, blood spilling from his lip. Marcus didn't stop her. No one did. When Anton lifted his head again, the smile was gone. Jamie leaned close, her voice steady. You'll talk. Every name, every drop point, every apartment, every account. You'll lead us to Victor. Or I will leave you in this room. And I'll let Marcus decide what to do with the man who laughed at his sister's pain. Anton gasped for air, looking from Jamie's cold eyes to the dark silhouette of Marcus standing like an executioner in the corner. The arrogance washed clean from his eyes. He gave a small, trembling nod. Jamie stepped back and released a long breath. She wasn't shaking. She didn't cry, but she knew she had just crossed a door. She could never return through. She was no longer a victim, no longer just a witness. From that moment on, she was the guide in the hunt for the very demons who once dragged her into hell. Marcus stood before the metal board where the map had been pinned, his finger tracing the routes leading toward the southern piers of Brooklyn, stopping precisely at a red mark, Pier 17. A receiving point abandoned after a massive storm a decade ago, a place without modern security systems, erased from the city's tax records, and therefore perfect for human traffickers to conduct business away from anyone's eyes. Anton had talked after hours locked in a freezing room, his pulse slowing under the influence of neuroblocking drugs and relentless psychological pressure, stammering that Victor would be there at midnight on Friday to meet a middleman from Europe with a new shipment. Jamie stood behind Marcus, listening to every word repeated back, feeling her skin turn cold as if brushed by sea wind, while her heartbeat thudded slow, steady, and heavy, like a drum announcing something larger drawing near. Lee moved around the room, checking each headset, each rice grain-sized tracker, each gun clean to a shine with no trace of oil. In his hand was the personnel list for that night, no more than 10 people, all handpicked by Marcus, all carrying blood debts against K Group. People who had lost family, people who had lived on the edge of the law, but had never once betrayed trust. Marcus didn't need numbers. He needed precision, needed people who would not hesitate when the moment arrived. Jamie stepped closer to the map, her eyes landing on the container yard behind the main warehouse, the place where she remembered seeing Victor walk out of a cold metal room, holding a cup of hot coffee and laughing as if savoring someone's pain behind a closed door. She pointed to it, describing each of Victor's steps, each spot where guards usually lingered to smoke, each narrow space in the sheet metal roofing one could climb through without being seen. Marcus didn't ask how she remembered so clearly. He simply looked at her and nodded once, as if confirming she was now an essential part of this plan. That night, the sky was the color of poured concrete, and the wind coming off the water was so cold it made the spine tremble. Unmarked vehicles were scattered around the pier, quiet and unremarkable. Everyone wore black, earpieces pressed tight, silencers strapped to their backs along with high-dose sedative injectors. Marcus stepped out first, his eyes sweeping the empty, dim landscape, as if peeling back layers of darkness that he already understood too well. Jamie followed close behind, and for the first time in years, she wasn't running from the place that had taken everything from her, she was walking into it. Deliberate, cold, unwavering. In her ear, Lee's voice came through, steady as a metronome. The West group was in position, the East group was, awaiting signal. Marcus made a small motion with his hand, and silence fell over all of them. Time stretched so tight it almost choked. Then an engine roared in the distance. Headlights cut through the thin veil of mist, illuminating the containers. The back door of a large truck swung open. A man in a long coat stepped out, hands in his pockets. With a gait so familiar, Jamie's hand tightened involuntarily. Victor Resnick, the man who had started everything, who had laughed at her pain, and at Elena's materialized like a ghost, stepping out of reality. Marcus tilted his head slightly, eyes never leaving the target, and then he spoke one word: begin. Victor walked out from behind the truck with the confidence of a man arriving at a boardroom meeting rather than an illegal exchange in the dead of night. He wore a long silver gray leather coat, the high collar hiding half his face, but his eyes were unmistakable, cold, sharp, like metal honed by years spent among blood and screams. Jamie crouched behind a container barely 20 meters away, every muscle coiled like a bowstring pulled to its limit. Her hand hovered near the trigger, but her gaze was locked entirely on him. He was speaking to another man, likely the European middleman Anton had mentioned. His voice carried just enough for the recording device hidden in the overhead lamppost to capture it clearly. "You're late. I don't like waiting." The other man's voice was low and foreign, tinged with the Balkans. "There were complications. Where's the sample?" Victor gave a soft laugh, and Jamie watched his head turn toward the eastern corner of the yard, where a steel door cracked open. From the darkness, two men dragged out a young woman, hands bound, mouth gagged, hair tangled, eyes wide with terror. She couldn't have been older than 20, and Jamie felt her throat close. A replica. A memory resurrected. Victor approached, lifting the girl's chin between two fingers as though examining a rare artifact. "As you can see, merchandise remains pristine, but special inventory doesn't stay quiet for long. You know how to keep them that way, don't you?" The middleman didn't reply, busy inspecting a faded serpent mark on the girl's wrist. Victor's eyes darkened, and a low chuckle escaped him. "That reminds me, do you know who my most special merchandise used to be?" No one answered. The entire pier seemed to freeze. Victor took a few slow steps toward an old container, speaking as though confiding in the shadows. "Jamie Carter, a fake name." He paused, smiling. "Echo 7. One of the FBI's finest little mice, embedded in my line for nearly 2 years. She thought I didn't know, but I always knew." Jamie heard every word like a blade slicing into her ear. Marcus heard it too, not far from her, his entire body gone still. Victor continued, almost with theatrical pleasure. "She was good at pretending, good at lying. She cried so beautifully, begged so, beautifully. And when I let her live, let her believe she escaped, that wasn't failure. I wanted to see how she would live knowing she was just a pawn whose turn was over." He turned abruptly, staring into a dark corner, his voice slicing the night. "Are you listening, Jamie? I know you're here." Jamie's finger tightened on the trigger, cold sweat prickling down her spine. Everything blurred around her except his voice echoing inside her head. "I hope you enjoyed those 3 years of freedom. Because tonight, I'm going to burn every memory you have all over again." From his vantage point, Marcus felt something cold crawl up his back. He glanced toward Jamie. She wasn't speaking, but her face had gone pale, not from fear of being exposed, but from a deeper wound being dragged into the open. Not by Victor, by the truth. Because Jamie knew the story she had left in the dark. The story that said she was just a victim was no longer whole. She had been an agent, she had lied, and now Victor was revealing it exactly the way he wanted. Like a trap, not for him, but for trust. Jamie stepped back, her shoulder trembling. Marcus said nothing. His eyes stayed on her. No anger, no judgment. But something was rising slowly behind them, caution. Jamie understood. In the moment, Victor revealed the truth. It wasn't just her life that had been placed on the line. It was the fragile thread between her and Marcus stretched thin, waiting for one breath too many to break. Jamie stood frozen behind the steel container, every word Victor had spoken still echoing in her mind like a hammer striking metal. Echo 7. FBI. There was nothing left to hide. Not from Victor, and especially not from Marcus. The wind coming off the water howled through the gaps between rusted shipping crates, carrying a cold sharp enough to cut through skin and lodge deep in her chest. She turned her head. Marcus remained where he was, only a few steps away, his shadow stretched long beneath the dim glow spilling from a container lamp. He was silent, unmoving, but his eyes were different now. Gone was the direct, steady trust he had shown her before. What replaced it was doubt raw and unshielded, as if someone had stripped away the last piece of ground he believed was real. Jamie couldn't form words. She knew anything she said now would sound like a cover. Marcus took a step toward her, each footfall heavy as stone. He stopped directly in front of her, his voice low and rough, but not angry. How long? That question cut deeper than an accusation, because it wasn't blame, it was the quiet ache of someone who had just lost his footing. Jamie drew a breath, unable to meet his gaze. 2 years inside their network, then 3 years running after I was exposed, meaning from the very beginning, she had never been what she seemed. Marcus looked straight at her, voice steady but weighted like granite. So back at the warehouse, when I found you, when you collapsed and told me to finish it, all of that, was it real? Or just part of another performance? Jamie finally lifted her head and looked at him without shields. I wasn't acting. Not then. Not when you cut the ropes. But I couldn't tell you the truth. Because I knew if I did, you would never take me with you. Marcus didn't answer. He turned away, eyes drifting toward Victor, still speaking casually with the broker as if he controlled the entire night. Do you know what I hate most? He said softly. Not liars. But people who choose the perfect moment to reveal the truth when they know there's no time left to turn back. Jamie swallowed hard, her voice trembling. I didn't choose the moment. Victor did. He wants to divide us. Marcus let out a dry, humorless breath. I don't need Victor's help for that. You already did it. Their silence settled like thick fog between them. In the distance, Lee whispered into the earpiece, signaling a shift in formation. The operation was still underway. The objective still stood. But in this small pocket of time, between Jamie and Marcus, something had cracked. Not shattered, but the first fracture had appeared. And sometimes, a fracture was all it took to bring down a wall. Jamie didn't cry. She simply stood there, wind sweeping her hair to one side, and in her eyes flickered an unspoken truth. I lied, but not to betray you. And Marcus turned not because he was abandoning her, but because if he stayed one moment longer, he feared he would ask one more question, one he wasn't ready to hear the answer to. Marcus had barely turned away when gunfire erupted at the head of the pier, shredding the thin silence that had barely held their doubts at bay. A bullet tore past the container, punching into the steel with a burst of sparks. Lee's voice cracked through the comms. They've spotted us, fall back. Ambush point compromised. Marcus yanked his Glock from his hip, slid out from behind cover, and fired 2 sharp rounds toward the muzzle flash glinting atop a shipping crate roof. Jamie dove after him purely on instinct, her mind no longer capable of dwelling on the conversation they had just left behind. Every sense now moved with the survival reflex drilled into her years ago. Across the pier, an engine roared. Victor's truck lurched backward toward the exit, as if he had already anticipated the ambush, and he wasn't fleeing alone. From behind the containers, silhouettes erupted, men clad in body armor, submachine guns raised, unleashing a storm of bullets toward Marcus's team withdrawing to the west. A round grazed Jamie's shoulder, slicing a burning line of blood but not deep enough to stop her. She staggered, righted herself, and kept moving, breathing through the pain. Her grip on the gun tightened. She slid along the side of a container, eyes locked on Victor's escape path. Marcus shouted, "Hold position, block his exit. Don't let him leave the pier." Lee and 2 others opened fire on the truck's rear tires. Both exploded, rubber flying, but the vehicle kept dragging itself forward, scraping past spilled crates and a leaning old lamppost. Victor didn't falter. He ducked lower, signaling his guards to swing open the truck's back door and yank the bound girl toward the cab, using her as a shield. Jamie's veins iced over. Not again. She wouldn't let another girl take the suffering she had endured. "Marcus," she screamed. "Don't let him take her." Marcus rolled behind an abandoned forklift, took aim at Victor, but before he could fire, a mercenary lunged out, gun aimed at his chest. The shot rang out. The mercenary slammed to the ground. Jamie had fired, her hands trembling. She rushed to Marcus, pulling him to his feet. They exchanged no words, but the look between them was an understanding. This battle had no room for personal wounds. In the distance, Lee shouted, "Cut him off, rear gate now." A barrage of bullets followed, striking the truck's fuel tank. Flames burst through the metal, lighting the night in searing gold. Victor rolled out of the driver's seat, dragging the girl with him, barking orders for cover fire, but the net was closing. One by one, Marcus's people appeared from the dark, guns locked onto every escape route. Victor laughed wild, unhinged, pressing the muzzle to the girl's head. "You think I won't, Marcus? I've killed younger than her. Back off. Now." Marcus didn't move. Jamie didn't move. Wind ripped through the burning pier, carrying smoke, salt, and the stench of blood, but everything seemed to hold its breath as Victor's gun touched the trembling girl's temple. A single shot cracked. Not Victor's, not Marcus's, Jamie's. The bullet tore through Victor's shoulder, spinning him back, forcing him to release the girl. Lee lunged forward, pulling her to safety. Victor turned toward Jamie, eyes blown wide not from pain, but disbelief. And before he could raise his weapon again, Marcus fired once, a precise shot into Victor's leg, dropping him onto the concrete where blood pooled into the dark water, spilling across the pier like the end of a long-delayed game. Sirens wailed in the distance. Jamie let her gun fall, breath ragged. She turned to Marcus. He looked at her longer than necessary. He said nothing, but in his eyes, something had been held on to, and something else perhaps had been forgiven. The wail of approaching police sirens grew sharper with each passing second, the flicker of red and blue lights bleeding into the darkness like restless veins pulsing across the night. The entire harbor lay smothered in the aftermath of gunfire, thick with smoke, ragged breathing, and the acrid scent of burning rubber. Victor was still on the ground, his leg torn open by the bullet, blood soaking through his leather jacket. Yet he was alive, conscious, and his eyes still carried that stubborn glint, the look of a man who believed this wasn't the end. Jamie stood only a few steps from Marcus, her pulse still racing from the final shot she had fired. But she was no longer trembling, no longer retreating. She was no longer the woman who had once been chained to a warehouse beam, begging for death. She had just saved Marcus's life, and more than that, she had saved herself from reliving the nightmare that had once swallowed her whole. Marcus moved toward Victor, about to signal Lee to restrain him, when a sudden noise rang out from atop the nearby container. Jamie snapped her head upward, her heart seizing as she spotted the silhouette of a surviving sniper taking aim at Marcus from only a few dozen meters away. No one else reacted in time, no one except her. Instinct overtook thought. Jamie lunged forward, slamming into Marcus and shoving him aside, both of them hitting the hard concrete just as the bullet tore into the steel behind them, sparks exploding like fireflies. Pain shot through Jamie's shoulder as they fell, but she held on to Marcus, shielding him with her body. When he lifted his head, he saw her eyes on him, not the eyes of someone who needed saving, but of someone prepared to sacrifice without hesitation. Marcus pushed her aside, rising sharply just as Lee and the rest of the team opened fire on the rooftop. The sniper was hit, tumbling off the container in a heavy, final thud against the concrete below. Silence swept over the pier again, broken only by the rapid thud of Jamie's heartbeat hammering against her ribs. Marcus knelt beside her, and for the first time there was no distance in his gaze. Why? The question needed no long explanation. Her breath trembled, warm and shallow, with blood still trickling from her earlier wound. "Because I don't owe you," she whispered. "I chose to. Not because of the past, not to make up for anything, but because I want to protect what's left." Marcus held her gaze for a long moment before offering his hand, pulling her to her feet. That hand felt warm and steady, just like the night he had freed her in that dark warehouse. But this time, neither of them was bound. Neither of them was a victim. They stood amid smoke, spent shells, and the ruin of impossible choices, but they had survived it together. Jamie turned toward Victor, now tightly bound, his face pinched with pain, yet turned away from her as their eyes met. His power was gone, his voice silenced. His ending was not death but utter helplessness. And in that helplessness, Jamie understood that the victor was never the one who fired the last bullet. It was the one who could still stand and face forward after being dragged to the deepest edges of darkness. Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture not of pity but recognition. She was no longer merely a living witness. She was part of this fight in her own right, and it was far from over. But next time, she would not be waiting to be saved. She would be leading the charge. Marcus pressed a hand to his earpiece, Lee's urgent voice cracking over the comms. "We have a problem. I don't see little Lucia in the safe zone." Jamie's blood ran cold. She whipped her head toward Victor, who still lay motionless beside the container, his limbs bound but his mouth curled into a small, smug smile, utterly unbecoming of a defeated man. He had been silent since being captured. No resistance, no protest, only a restless flicker in his eyes as if awaiting a perfectly timed reveal. Jamie stormed toward him and grabbed his collar, yanking him upright. "What did you do to her?" Victor lifted an eyebrow, his shoulders shaking in a faint, mocking chuckle. "Not me. I'm right here, aren't I? But I always prepare." Jamie's grip tightened until her knuckles blanched. "Don't play games with me. Where is she?" Victor turned his eyes toward Marcus, then slowly back to Jamie. "She's your reflection. Don't you see it? The eyes, the anger, the fear tucked away beneath it. I just thought, it would be a shame if you had to watch it happen again. Like Elena," the name was a blade sliding effortlessly beneath her ribs. Jamie staggered back, choking on air. Marcus drew his gun and pressed it to Victor's forehead, his voice a low growl. "You do not get to say her name." But Victor simply closed his eyes, breathing out softly, like provoking them was the last move in a game he had already played to completion. A phone rang. The device in Victor's coat pocket buzzed violently. Lee snatched it and glanced at the screen. No caller ID. Marcus nodded sharply, and Lee answered on speaker. A man's voice filled the cold air, smooth and oily, laced with a faint Eastern European cadence. "Everything has gone exactly as Mr. Victor predicted. The target has been moved to the meeting point. We await further instructions." No one spoke. Jamie grabbed Marcus's hand, her gaze turning fierce. "We cannot let them take Lucia away. I'm going." Marcus hesitated, his voice rough. "Jamie, if it's a trap, if they're trying to pull you out where we can't protect you." She nodded. "Maybe they are. But I'm the only one they want to talk to. I used to be a pawn. Now I'll use that to end this game." A set of coordinates pinged to the phone, pointing toward a remote section of forest in northern New Jersey, over an hour's drive away. They split up. Marcus assigned Lee and 2 others to accompany Jamie, while he stayed behind to secure Victor and ensure nothing slipped through the cracks. The road to the meeting point narrowed into a single track, surrounded by dense pine trees, the wind dragging long, haunting whispers through the branches. Jamie stepped out of the vehicle, her gun hidden beneath her coat, her eyes sweeping the shadows. Ahead stood an old wooden cabin, its door slightly ajar, a dim pool of amber light spilling from within. She entered cautiously, her heart pounding. Inside, little Lucia sat on a chair, her hands loosely bound, her mouth uncovered, her wide eyes reflecting both fear and relief. Standing behind her was a broad-shouldered man whose face she did not recognize, yet the way his hand rested on Lucia's shoulder made it unmistakably clear he was more than a guard. He smiled, his manner gentle as though this were a simple negotiation. "Jamie Carter, or perhaps I should call you Agent Echo 7. We want to make a deal." Jamie tightened her grip, her voice a blade. "Give me the girl. If you don't, I will make sure none of you walk out of here whole." The man chuckled softly. "No need for threats. We have no interest in keeping the child. But Victor, he wanted you to see your own helplessness. Wanted to know if you could save someone a second time, or fail again, like with Elena." Jamie stepped closer, her gaze burning. "I'm not who I used to be." The man nodded, his eyes gleaming with something almost like respect. "I know. And that is why we'll give you a chance. 1 bullet, 1 target. If you shoot me before I pull the trigger, the child lives. If not, then history repeats. The game began." Jamie drew a slow breath, reaching behind her. No trembling, no doubt. She had survived the worst, and now she would end it, once and for all. Jamie stood motionless inside the cold, breathless wooden cabin, each tick from the old wall clock echoing like a countdown on Lucia's fragile life. The little girl sat frozen on the chair, her wide, terrified eyes locked onto Jamie, as if clinging to the last thread of hope she could find. The man behind her wore a faint smile, his hand resting lightly on the grip of the gun at his hip, a gesture that did nothing to hide the ease with which he was prepared to pull the trigger. Every escape route flickered through Jamie's mind and died just as quickly. The distance between her and the man was too small, the risk too heavy. One wrong move, one nervous twitch, and Lucia would never take another breath. Jamie drew in another long, steadying breath, her hands slowly lifting, her gaze never leaving the girl's. "I didn't come here to play games with a child's life. I came here to end this." The man raised an eyebrow, a brief flicker of surprise crossing his features before he let out a soft laugh. "So you choose surrender. How humane." Jamie nodded, her voice low and unwavering. "Yes, I surrender. Let the girl go and I'll accept whatever you want. I came unarmed." "You can check." The man signaled with his eyes, and another figure stepped through the back door, moving toward Jamie, searching every layer of her clothing, every finger, every scar. No gun, no recording device, no backup plan. Jamie was completely bare. The man's smile widened. A once famous agent handing herself over like this. Victor will enjoy hearing about it. He tilted his head toward Lucia. "All right, one life for one life. I keep my word. Lucia, you may go." But no one stepped forward. No one loosened the ropes. Jamie frowned. "You said she was free." The man nodded. "Correct, but you forget one thing. Freedom is never free." He drew his gun suddenly, not at Jamie but toward the door. In that split second, Jamie saw the back door crack open, and Marcus's familiar eyes glint in the darkness as he raised 3 fingers. 3 seconds. Jamie understood instantly, and she moved. She let her body drop to the floor as if fainting from fear, the man chuckling as he stepped closer to check. But the door burst open, and a gunshot cracked through the cabin, the first bullet tearing into the man's shoulder and dropping him instantly, his weapon skittering across the floor. Jamie rolled aside, sprang up, and the thin blade she had hidden in her waistband flashed as she hurled it toward the second man, rushing in through the left window. The blade sinking into his wrist and knocking the gun from his hand. Marcus stormed in behind her, firing without hesitation, 3 sharp shots dropping the remaining men reaching for their weapons. Amid the chaos, Jamie raced to Lucia, slicing through the ropes and pulling the trembling girl close, shielding her small head with her body as the final bullets echoed through the rotting cabin walls. Then silence. Heavy, trembling silence broken only by ragged breaths, the fading stench of gunpowder, the faint char of splintered wood, and the frantic beating inside Jamie's chest as she whispered to Lucia that it was over. Marcus approached slowly, taking in the scene before him, his eyes lingering on Jamie, who had willingly surrendered her life for a child, then weaponized that surrender into the perfect strike. He said nothing, merely retrieved the discarded gun and swept the room methodically to ensure no threat remained. Jamie lifted her head, her eyes meeting his in wordless understanding. A single nod passed between them. No thanks needed, no explanation owed, only recognition. She had changed. She was no longer Echo 7, no longer the broken captive begging for death. She was the woman who saved this child because she chose to, and for Marcus, that was the woman he could trust. The thrum of a military helicopter carved through the sky above the New Jersey forest as Jamie and Marcus escorted little Lucia back to the temporary command post near the highway. The special operations team had already swept away the last remnants of Victor's men, and the wooden cabin burned quietly behind them, consumed by a small electrical fire sparked by the smoke grenade. Jamie sat in the back seat of the vehicle, Lucia curled into her arms, her eyes on the deep violet horizon, where the first hints of dawn slowly brightened the world. No one spoke during the drive back to the safe facility, but there was no distance between them anymore. No need for gratitude, no apologies left unsaid. They had crossed the final threshold, through survival, through choice, through trust and action. When the car halted before the fortified compound on the outskirts of Brooklyn, Lee stepped out first, signaling the guards to spread out. Jamie climbed out, and immediately her gaze landed on a face she had hoped never to see again. Victor stood in the courtyard, his hands cuffed, 2 guards flanking him, the wound on his leg still seeping through hastily wrapped bandages. He smiled when he saw her, as if he had been waiting for this moment all along. Jamie walked toward him slowly, each step measured by her breath. No one stopped her. No one needed to. Victor lifted his chin. I know you won't kill me. You're the kind who needs rules to feel righteous. But me? I am the rule. Jamie stood before him, her expression neither angry nor afraid, only a suffocating stillness. She pulled the Glock from Marcus's holster, Marcus silent behind her, offering neither push nor protest. She raised the gun and aimed at Victor's forehead. He did not close his eyes. He even smirked. Do it. End it. One bullet, and everyone will call it justice. But Jamie did not pull the trigger. Instead, she lowered the gun, her gaze never leaving him. No, I won't kill you. Not because I'm weak. Because you don't deserve the mercy of a bullet. You'll face judgment under the law, and under the memories of every life you've destroyed. I want you alive. I want you waking up every day seeing the faces of children like Lucia, hearing the voices of people you will never hurt again. That is the real death sentence. Victor froze, speechless for the first time. Jamie turned away, placing the gun back into Marcus's hand without looking, but as she walked off, a small sound behind her stopped her in her tracks. Victor had lunged for the sidearm of one of the guards, his blood-slick hand curling around the grip. Jamie spun on instinct, but too late. A gunshot cracked through the cold morning air. Not from Victor. From Marcus. One bullet, straight into Victor's chest. His body collapsed to the concrete like a burlap sack torn open at the seams. This time, it truly was over. Jamie stared at his lifeless form. No sorrow. No regret. Only a period. Not marking Victor's end, but her own awakening. Echo 7 was gone, buried with the man who once believed he could control her life. But Jamie Carter remained. Alive and free. A thin rain fell over the courtyard of the temporary detention site as Jamie stood alone beneath the overhang, the yellow light spilling from the hallway behind her, casting her shadow long across the damp concrete. Marcus approached from behind, the steady crunch of his footsteps on gravel neither hurried nor slow. He didn't speak at first. He simply stood beside her, hands in the pockets of his long coat, eyes fixed on the corner of the yard where Victor's body had been taken away less than an hour earlier. He drew a sealed envelope from his pocket, simple and thin, and handed it to her. Jamie took it, feeling the dry weight of the paper, heavier, somehow, than the bullet that had ended Victor's life. What's in here? Her voice was soft but direct, without avoidance. Marcus glanced at her for a moment before answering. A release from prosecution. A full wipe of your record and a new identity. If you want, you can leave New York tonight. Leave all of this behind. Jamie froze, her eyes fixed on the envelope as if it could speak her choice for her. Marcus continued, his voice low and sincere. You've done your part. No one's hunting you anymore. No debts left to pay in blood. You can disappear, live a life untouched by the past. You're no longer Echo 7, no longer an agent, no longer someone on the run. You're Jamie Carter. And you have the right to choose for yourself for the first time. The wind rose, sweeping a few decaying leaves against the edge of the roof. Jamie opened the envelope and saw inside a new identification card, a passport, and a one-way plane ticket to a small town in the western United States, a place where no one knew her name and no one cared why she had arrived. She let out a quiet laugh, but it wasn't a relieved laugh. It was thoughtful, almost conflicted. I used to think if I ever had this chance, I wouldn't hesitate. I dreamed of disappearing. But now that it's here, I'm not sure. Marcus nodded, not pushing her. That's why I didn't choose for you. I only gave you the option. The decision is yours. You're not cornered anymore. Jamie folded the envelope and held it tightly in her hand. I don't know if I'm ready to be ordinary, but I know one thing. I don't want to live in the dark anymore, pretending none of this happened. I don't want a life built on running. Marcus turned toward her, his expression softening. So what will you do? Jamie looked out into the thin rain, her voice steady. I'm staying. I owe something to the dead and to the living. I want to end this, not just for myself, but for Elena and for every victim. I want to use the truth to change something. If anyone knows what it's like to lose everything, it's me. Marcus didn't answer, but he nodded. In that nod lay agreement, and a deep respect that required no words. No one was forcing her. No one was binding her. Just two people standing side by side, and a decision born out of freedom. She didn't need to run. She would walk forward. And this time, under the name she had reclaimed with blood and courage, Jamie Carter, not Echo, not anymore. Jamie sat alone by the window of the small room above the temporary headquarters, the streetlight filtering through frosted glass, casting a pale stripe of brightness across her cheek. Outside, the city refused to sleep. The streets glimmered faintly, cars moved like fragments of unfinished memories. She held the new identification card in her hand, the face of the woman she could become printed on its surface, though inside she still felt like Jamie Carter, with all her fractures unhealed. She turned the card over and over as if hoping it could show her the future in its cold letters. Freedom. What did that word taste like? She had once believed freedom meant leaving everything behind, disappearing into silence, becoming someone no one spoke of again. But now, with Victor gone and the shadows receding, she finally understood that freedom wasn't walking away from everything, it was having the courage to face everything without fear. Freedom didn't come from escape, but from choosing the road ahead, and she had chosen to stay, to face the past, to rebuild from the wreckage, rather than cover it with a new name. But alongside freedom came something heavier: debt. Not financial, not to an organization, but to people. Jamie owed Elena a chance she could never give. She owed Lucia a safer world to grow up in. She owed Marcus the trust she had fractured, and she owed herself an honest answer to whether she deserved to keep living. She knew she couldn't restore everything. She couldn't bring back the dead or erase what she had done as Echo 7, but she could turn mistakes into resolve and pain into purpose. No one was asking her to do this. That was precisely why it mattered. No orders. No mission briefing. Only the will to reclaim the part of her humanity once crushed under fear. Marcus had been right this time, it was all up to her. And that was more terrifying than any underground network she had ever infiltrated, because it was real. No one to blame. No excuses left. Jamie rose and stepped toward the small mirror in the corner. She studied her reflection for a long time, not to check her scars, not to measure her wounds, but to confirm that the woman in the mirror was truly her, a woman who had broken but not vanished, who had despaired but not surrendered, who was learning to live again, not for anyone else but for herself. From the kitchen downstairs, she heard Lucia giggling as she played Uno with Lee, the soft sound ringing like a bell signaling something new had begun. A beginning without grandeur, but real. Jamie exhaled slowly, turned toward the desk, folded the envelope with the new identity, and placed it in the drawer before locking it. She didn't throw it away, but she wouldn't carry it with her either. If she needed it one day, that would be a different choice. But today, she chose to stay. Not out of fear or obligation, but out of freedom. Dawn broke across Brooklyn's horizon as a gentle sweep of light tearing through the last remnants of night. In the small room on the second floor, Jamie Carter stood by the window with a cup of hot coffee in hand, her gaze on the first rays brushing across rooftops still slick with dew. The distant honk of an early bus, the soft whir of a delivery bike rolling down the street, the footsteps of the paper carrier, all of it formed a familiar overture that never lost its quiet vitality. A new day had begun, and for Jamie, it was more than that. It was a new chapter. She was no longer Echo 7, no longer the shadow moving through raids and interrogations, no longer the survivor crawling out of torture and betrayal. She was Jamie Carter, a woman who chose confrontation over fleeing, forgiveness over vengeance, life over mere existence. Her journey had not started with triumph, but with collapse. Not with applause, but with silent tears. Yet in every fracture, in every moment she nearly broke, she had learned how to rise. Jamie stepped into the hallway where Lucia sat by the window reading a book, her face lighting up the moment she saw her. It was the gaze of a child who knew this world still had people willing to protect what was good, gentle, and right. Jamie smiled and sat beside her, saying nothing, simply sharing a peaceful moment after too much storm. Life twisted in unpredictable ways, dragging us down at times, but as long as we didn't give up, hope remained. And in mornings like this, we all had the right to choose to live fully. Jamie's story wasn't just a journey of survival. It was a reminder that every person can find themselves again after breaking. That was the truest lesson in her story. Freedom isn't something handed to us. It's something we claim when we dare to face our pain, forgive ourselves, and begin again, even with the smallest step. And if you've followed her story and feel your heart stirred, we hope you'll share your thoughts in the comments. How did Jamie's journey resonate with you? Did it remind you of someone in your life? Have you ever stood at your own crossroads between forgiveness and fear, between holding on and letting go? Tell us. Your reflections are the fuel that keeps us creating stories that touch the deepest parts of the heart. And if you found meaning in this emotional journey, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video with the people you care about. We'll bring you new stories every day, stories full of inspiration, tenderness, and humanity, crafted for listeners of all ages, especially those who appreciate slowing down and reflecting. Thank you for spending your time with us through this long story. We wish you and your family good health, peaceful spirits, and days filled with meaning and joy. Goodbye, and we'll see you in the next video.